Just ahead, Russia's president, well, making some new threats. Ready for this? About pointing nuclear weapons at Europe. What's going on here? Is Vladimir Putin just having a bad week, or are we standing on the possibility of the brink of a new Cold War? Well, that was a test earlier this week of Russia's newest missile. Russian President Vladimir Putin criticizing the United States today. He says a plan to install a missile defense system in Europe will increase the chances of a nuclear conflict. Washington wants to prevent attacks from rogue states like Iran, but Russia sees that as a threat to its own security. What does this mean? Joining us now is Fox News foreign affairs analyst, Ambassador Dennis Ross, who helped negotiate some of the treaties with the Soviets. Ambassador Ross, thank you for joining us on this Sunday morning.
Nice to be with you.
What is so disturbing about what Putin says is that he may target European capitals with nuclear weapons if the U.S. continues with this missile shield program. Are we in the abyss now of a potential new Cold War?
I think that we're certainly at a point where the relationship as we've known it for the last several years is undergoing a change. The question is, how bad will it become? I would not exaggerate how bad it will become, because I still think the Russian capability to reestablish what we used to see in the Cold War is very different. For one thing, they won't foment troubles around the world quite the way they did before, because whenever they deal with any other countries now, they sell the weapons, they don't give it to them. They don't have that kind of power, but they want to be a power on the world stage again, and we're going to have to recognize that frequently they will take steps that we don't like.
You know, we want to protect Europe from Iran, and this specifically deals with Poland and the Czech Republic. You know, but what happens if we continue and go ahead as we are on this missile shield, and Putin, you know, puts the codes in there that aims those missiles back at London and Paris?
Well, then we'll obviously be in an environment that's a whole lot worse than it's been. You know, the fact is, we don't know for sure that the Russians ever really changed all the targeting of their weapons. Yeltsin said they did. We don't know for sure exactly what was done. We don't know for sure exactly how the Russian military has behaved. What we know is that the Russian military is dramatically weaker than it was before. Its forces are smaller. They're not nearly as modernized, certainly in the armor and ground level. What they're doing now is trying to show they have the symbols of power, and that's why you see new missile development. It's cheaper to do that than it is to build large ground forces.
But could that make them more desperate, perhaps, that they would rely on the nuclear weapons in these missiles because they don't have that prowess, as you say?
Well, I think the answer to that is absolutely, but that doesn't mean they're about to think about launching them. I think what he's trying to do is signal the West that you're going to have a problem with us unless you become much more sensitive to our needs, unless you take our concerns into account, unless you basically check everything you do with us before you do it. Now, some of that I think could be managed. Some of it is more difficult to manage, and there are limits that we need to impose on the Russians. The fact of the matter is, Russian behavior of late is a source of some concern, and it should be a source of some concern.
And finally, do you see a way that perhaps this can be backed down? I mean, obviously it seems that we're intent on this missile shield because of the Iranian threat.
No doubt about that. I think maybe the way to handle this at this point is to use the Europeans more as a bridge between us and the Russians. But we have offered the Russians to include themselves in this program. I was noting that the Chancellor of Germany, Merkel, was suggesting that the Russians, in fact, need to be involved in a way where they really feel they're given a piece of the action. We don't just brief them on it, we actually give them a piece of the action, maybe even a piece of the technology. Way back when the Strategic Defense Initiative was being developed, there were points at which Ronald Reagan and then President Bush, First President Bush, were in fact prepared to include the Russians in the technology, and maybe that's one answer.
Well, it seems like, you know, those who don't know history are condemned to repeat it. We have to take some lessons from the past of some of what you were involved in. Dennis Ross, Mr. Ambassador, thank you for joining us.